Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back to anyone who's been listening. So, for those of you who listened to the last episode on the muse and the creation cycle, you'll know we got into an incredibly juicy little tidbit thread at the end of the episode about uh, mastery and storytelling. And we were just dropping in with a prayer and a check-in prior to hitting record. And Hannah, I'm actually going to invite you to maybe share a little bit because it was so beautiful and so beautifully articulated about how storytelling makes us deeply human.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, there are so many things that we like to do as humans to distinguish ourselves from other sentient beings on this planet. We have opposable thumbs, we have a brain, we have language, whatever it is. And at the end of the day, it's how we tell stories. It's art. It's how we create. That's what makes us so distinct to me compared to our plant and animal brethren and sistren, and that's the beautiful thing about being a human is what kind of story are you telling and how are you telling it? And each and every human on this planet does have a story to tell and has a unique way of doing that when tapped into authenticity. I think that's the key because there's a lot of beings out there who are not tapped into their authenticity. And that's where stories can become quote unquote boring. Where I've heard this before, and it's like, well, maybe it's because you're just not authentically sharing it yet. Maybe you're not authentically living it yet. But at the end of the day, that is what makes us divinely human. The stories.
Mm, yeah, it's beautiful. You do a lot of this is like for anyone who hasn't met Hannah yet, this is like Hannah's jam. Like she knows all the things about this, the mythopoetic, the myths, the legends, the folklore, the stories, the lineages of gods and goddesses, and all of this is incredibly beautiful. And the hero and heroine's journey, right? I'd love to actually, like, while we're in the storytelling
Mm.
and touching on the idea of the human stories and how we tell the stories and personalizing our stories when we're living in stories we've fabricated to support our own version of things versus our authentic story. I'd love to just let you riff on like that, all of that
Ooh,
jazz. I'm just gonna
good luck to
here's
all of
a
us.
charcuterie board of things you could pick up on there and run with.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I would love to believe I know all the mythologies and stories and folklores. I certainly do not. I know more than the average person, but I do. It is my jam. It's something I've always loved. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, I just think it's so fascinating to study and learn about different types of myths and folk stories because it really shows how all these different cultures have emerged from the earth the way that they have and formed the way that they have and why they exist, and they're always unique, and at the heart of like every creation myth it's always kind of the same. It's usually like spawning from some circular like void energy or like an egg or like you know what I mean, like in and that's where you start to get into Carl Jung's work that's related to the subconscious and the unconscious collectives, and it's that's where symbolism comes in and spirit speaks in symbol. So when we talk about learning how to speak spirit, learning how to speak spirit, it's through symbols. So stories are our ways, oof, Here it is. Stories are our way of connecting with spirit because it's through the symbolism that God speaks to us. And when it comes to the hero and heroine's journey, I think most people who've listened and are tapped into kind of like any form of storytelling, they've probably heard of one form of the hero's journey, which was really coined by Joseph Campbell in the 50s, based on his work with Jung and all the psychologists, Freud, blah, blah, blah. Beautiful. Joseph Campbell is brilliant in that capacity, and that it's usually shown in a circle, of course it is, of this hero's journey of starting at home and crossing the threshold, having trials and tribulations, making friends, having to really experience a transformation to get to a new way of being. That's the hero's journey. And it usually kind of like starts at home and then like ends at home, but the hero's been transformed in the process. As an example is the Odyssey, pretty quintessential Western story version, but you've got Odysseus who leaves Ithaca at the beginning, goes on this huge experience with the Trojan Wars, and then has to go through the Odyssey of coming back home to claim his throne again as king of Ithaca after being gone for over 10 years, I think. That's kind of it. Another one that might be in more recent memory of everyone is The Wizard of Oz and Dorothy, right? With Wicked that just came out. So in terms of the heroine's journey, that's a little bit less known. And actually, I feel badly because I cannot remember the woman who wrote the book about it at this point in time. And that's how obscure it kind of is. I want to say her name is Margaret something. Anyways, bless you, darling. My apologies for not knowing your name. However, what's so beautiful about the heroine's journey is it's similar in that the feminine is going on a journey to transform. However, it's not in as distinct and clear a circle as the hero's journey. The hero's journey, even though it's shown in a circle, it's much more linear in that it goes from A to B to C to D to E all the way back. Whereas in the heroine's journey, it's scattered. And in fact, the heroine's journey could start anywhere on the map and then bounce to another place on the map, and then another place, and then another place, and then actually go back to where it started and then start a new journey. And so the heroine's journey is much more chaotic. Go figure. The feminine being the embodiment of creation and chaos creation energy, from which all things are born of the no thing. We've spoken about that on another episode. So the heroine's journey is a lot more complex in that capacity. And that makes sense because the feminine is always connected to the cycles of the moon and connected to the darkness. And if you even get into this idea of dark matter, it's like, do we really know what dark matter is? It's this very unknown, complicated abyss. And even though both the heroine's journey and the hero's journey take us on some form of initiation through darkness, because the feminine is the embodiment of darkness itself, it is a different type of transformational journey. And whereas in ancient times, when there were rites of passage for the masculine, especially in Indo-European cultures, but this is true everywhere, the masculine would head into caves. The word cave in Aramaic, which is in the Middle East, like the language of Yeshua, the name for cave and womb was the same. It was hara. And if you even get into this idea of the word whore, the word whore actually stems from the word hara as well. And it's then, if you want to start going on any rabbit holes, anybody else that's a word nerd with me, you look at any word in the English language that has an HAR in it, that is directly connected to the womb cave. Like even the word chariot has HAR in it, right? And the chariot is a transportive vessel to take you from one place to the next. So this concept that men would go into caves or even like be initiated by priestesses who were initiates of Isis and the goddess Ishtar Inanna, they would be initiated into manhood, into kinghood as a result of transformative journeys. The feminine goes on the journey in such a different way because she is the cave itself. So learning how to hold the capacity for being the transformative vessel, that requires a different skill set. And so when you look at life as art itself, how we each and every one of us goes on the journey to become embodied in either becoming the cave, the womb, the goddess, the grail, or being a steward for the grail, that requires different story to be told and to be embodied, because the truest stories that land for each and every one of us are the ones where somebody has lived it. They're not just telling the story, they've actually embodied it. And if they're a really excellent storyteller, like a bard in Druidic culture, the bards would be the storytellers. They were the singers, the musicians, the poets, and they would pass on the legends orally. They were, even if they themselves had not lived it, they were such good storytellers that they could become embodied in it as like actors and really feel it, to be able to transmute that language into aliveness for whoever heard it.
So beautiful. Oh, there's so much richness there. So I did a little live Googling. Maureen Murdoch, is that the
Yes,
one?
that's it.
I'm gonna
Thank
very
you.
badly try
Yes.
and show this on the screen. Um,
Bless you, Maureen.
but
I
yeah,
knew it was an
Maureen
N.
Murdoch,
Thank you.
The Heroine's
Oh,
Journey, a
and
woman's quest for wholeness.
her initials are also MM, which is Mother Mary, which is Mary Magdalene. So she is a holder of the codes, which is the heroine's journey. So I just want to like just put that in there too. That's powerful medicine. Maureen
Beautiful.
Murdoch, bless you, angel.
Beautiful. There's, I mean, there's so much in what you were sharing there. I think it's so beautiful. The thing that's really kind of grabbing my attention or my awareness, the energy that is winking at me, sparkling at me, is really this piece around the feminine version of this journey of the storytelling and the personalized experience of that. As you were sharing and speaking to that, you know, being the cave and needing to learn a different way of being or embody a different way of being, there's it. So I had a massive grief release this morning. Spontaneously out of nowhere, I woke up feeling amazing and then had no idea what I was. It was like the phrase that came through was, I've lost so much along the way. And it kind of felt personal, kind of felt ancestral, collective. It was just this deep, deep, deep feeling of loss. And towards the end of that release, the insight that was coming through was like what was leaving my body was the idea that there was a correct way to do life. I realized that I'd been like, you know, I'm sure a lot of people relate to this. Like we get into this little spirals, down, down, down we go, where the mind is like, I'm failing at life, like I'm failing at how to do life. Like I don't know how to do life. I don't know how to do this properly. And for the first time really in my body at the end of this grief release, I was like, I'm sorry, where did I get this idea that there was a correct way to do life? Like, we can logically know that this is not true. We can understand that, you know, there are many, many, many different ways to live and experience this existence and all of that. But it really dawned on me in an extremely deep way in my body, where I was like, this is what's leaving, is this idea that there is a correct way to do life. And I didn't realize I was holding that. And as you were speaking to this idea of like the feminine version of the hero's journey, like the heroine's journey, that this chaotic, non-linear, very, very different energy around it, like it feels so relevant and intertwined and resonant in this moment where I'm like, oh, I don't personally want to believe that there's a I don't want to. I kind of do. I just sometimes I feel like I can't help myself. But I don't want to believe that there's this like nefarious agenda with the patriarchy and all of this kind of thing. I believe it's had impact and ripple effects and influence on women for sure, on the feminine for sure. Was it intentional? I don't know. I don't know for sure. I really have no idea. I know there's an impact. I know there's an effect from that. But if we think about it in those terms, right, where it's like the thing that was described early on was people, as you were saying, looking back at old texts and Carl Jung and all of this, like they speak to the hero's journey. If you go back and look at ancient Greek comedy, tragedy, or through Shakespeare or whatever it is, there is in these stories, there is the hero's journey of overcoming the obstacles, becoming something new, being transformed, and returning home in that, and the rites of passage that mirror that in many different cultures. But it's all very like male energy centered, or masculine energy centered, or to men essentially. Like, this is what was the primary focus of a lot of it. And to have this sense of like, oh, we do get to have a heroine's version of that, a female, feminine, not female is probably the wrong word, feminine energy version of that. Because I do believe we should all be embodying these, right? This is not about men and women necessarily. This feels more kind of like the balanced whole. But that missing piece where it's like, if I thought there was a correct way to do life, like, has that come through this predominant storytelling that feels like a linear, patriarchal, like male focused, masculine energy focused, direct, linear kind of way of being and exploring life and doing life? But what if it's not that? What if it gets to be more free? What it gets to be more chaotic and feel more innate and more natural and more just like whatever's coming up in the moment, bouncing around in a completely different way. Like, that feels very relieving to my system. And it feels very much like that's what I've struggled with, is this like, there's a right way to do life. And it's like, even down to the conditioning where it's like, oh, I've overcome these difficulties, therefore I need to do something with that. It leads on from the thing in a very linear way. And it's like, oh, well, I've overcome this, this, and this, and this. And therefore I need to keep overcoming challenges and then doing something with that in the world and all of this. And it's like, is this serving me in a female body, in a feminine energy method of being? I don't know. It feels so beautiful. I've gone on a bit of a tangent here, but I was just
No,
feeling
it's
really inspired by the richness of this. I was like, like these storylines have not been necessarily good for my body or for my mind or for my sense of self. And it's like, if there's something else, if there's something to be in that is like an embodied energy of, there isn't a correct way to be doing life. Like, it gets to be so different, because that was heavy to feel like constantly overcoming challenges, or my life isn't working in the linear way. Because we get told, don't be linear, be in the feminine, allow yourself to breathe and move, let yourself do life in your own way. But we don't always get given the alternative to move into and breathe into. I think that's quite enough talking from me. So
I love
if you
you.
needed an embodiment of the feminine bouncing around chaos energy, everything that just came out of my mouth was it. Boing, 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 boing,
I
boing,
was
boing.
gonna
I
say
think I got all the points out.
you and I are totally like in our feminine right now. It's so perfect, and I love it. I think in general we're in our feminine, but I also feel that you and I are both balanced and masculine energy as well. And that's really what it's about. And yes, it's not about male or female, it's about masculine and feminine. You can call it whatever you want. The other language that I sometimes use is like solar energy versus lunar energy. And then there's also the languaging that I've come up with in recent years where it's the artist energy versus the curator energy. If you look at it from like a museum context, where you've got the artist creating very chaotically and just creating for creation's sake, but there's no reason to it. It's very emotional and chaotic. And then the curator comes in and goes, wow, look at all that you've created. I have a museum. People should see this. I want to organize it for you. Can I do that for you? And the artist is like, oh, thank God that you're here because I have no idea what to do with this. So it doesn't matter what you call it. It happens. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because this is the world I live in, right? It just so happens that most male-bodied beings have more masculine energy, and that's why it's called that. And then more female-bodied beings have more feminine energy. Now, the reality is that it's all a spectrum, right? And we're always both. It's just kind of what is your baseline percentage of feeling more in your feminine or your masculine. And then it's probably a different conversation entirely that will be very much more edgy, I suspect. That's around, what does it mean to be in the feminine energy versus the masculine energy? And I don't necessarily feel like we need to go there today. But, in terms of those who identify as more in their feminine energy, it is a little bit more chaotic. It just is, because for those of us who have more feminine energy and have physical wounds, we literally bleed and cleanse energy through our bodies every month, more or less. That's the idea. Obviously, everybody is different, and, how often those bleeds are occurring or like what's going on. There's so many things that are going on with that. But, in general, that is the idea, is that the bleed is the winter time to process out all of the energy, whether it's ours or the energy that we're holding on to or the energy that we take on because we allow somebody to enter through us sexually. We're cleansing that energy out. And sometimes, and like in a community, when you're really living in a community with women are processing for the community, quite literally, like not just even through our bodies, but when women gather, because women gather together and come together. And when women connect and gather together, they heal. They heal the collective. That's part of the purpose of women, is to come together and to heal. So, of course, it's a little bit more chaotic. And of course, it's, I'm going to say something that feels a little edgy to share because it's not in alignment with mainstream, but who wants to be mainstream these days? How boring. Anyways, so the reality is everyone wants to blame the patriarchy. Everyone wants to call it toxic patriarchy, whatever. Everyone wants to blame patriarchy. But the thing is, first of all, there's no such thing as toxic. It doesn't exist. It's only wounded. It is wounded patriarchy. If you're going to talk about it, you must talk about the wounding because there's a reason it's coming from that space. But if you believe in a wounded patriarchy, you do also believe in a wounded matriarchy, and they exist, and it's more shadow. It's a shadow wounded matriarchy. You cannot have one without the other. They exist together. So if anybody is blaming the patriarchy for anything, you must look at how the feminine and the matriarchy have created that monster. And it's a chicken and egg kind of a thing. It really is. And again, that might even be a different episode entirely. But the reason we have, bringing it back into the stories, the reason we have storytelling that feels linear is because for the past handful of centuries, we have been led by a patriarchal society at large. And in general, because of male circadian rhythms that are in tune with the sun's energy, it is more straightforward. It's more the same every time. Men can wake up, and postmenopausal women as well can wake up, and they can have more regular cycles. You can eat the same thing, you can do the same thing, you can, and it works for the body in a different way. But for those of us who are bleeding, it doesn't work that way. Our energy is constantly shifting. And like for me personally, the more I've been in tune with my own menstrual cycle, my own lunar cycle, I'm like, okay, this week I feel amazing. I feel like I finally got what it means to be in, my follicular phase. Wow, I really got it nailed this time. And then like my ovulation comes and I'm just losing my mind, out of my mind, like lusty, not able to control myself. And I'm like, well, that week of ovulation really went poorly. Great. Good to know, or then it's like luteal and I'm like, oh God, I am never good at this phase. I am always bad at this phase, and then my bleed week is always different every time. I mean, I'm bleeding now. So I'm definitely more in this kind of misty, oracular, we're all over the place chaos because of that. And the thunder just came in as I said that. And of course, but it's not as straightforward for us. And the other piece about being a human, regardless of energy or sex, humans like to have a little bow ending. We like to have a resolution. It feels good to have a resolution. And they lived happily ever after. Yeah, well, what happens after happily ever after? What happens after resolution? And I think it's really just us as human beings denying that there's never resolution. It does not exist. It's fabricated like children's stories that are written to lull us to sleep and help us feel safe, that there are no monsters under the bed. Like, resolution only exists in our mind because we choose to believe that there is a resolution, whereas the reality is there is never resolution, and the monsters under the bed are real. And by the way, they belong to us, and sometimes they belong to our ancestors and are inherited by us, and sometimes they're sent by other people who want to harm us because they haven't dealt with their own monsters. So it's part of the human experience to want the correct way to end it, the correct way to do it. But something else you said that was very interesting is this idea of right. And because language is so tricky and it's all spell casting, we've conflated the word right with correct, when the reality is that right, that word has stemmed from being right-brained. Well, the right brain controls the left side of the body, which is the feminine side of the body, the lunar side of the body, which is connected to the goddess. So if you are in right alignment, you are in alignment with the goddess. You are in alignment with the creator. So there is a right way to live. There is not, however, a correct way to live, and they are not the same.
Beautiful. I love that. I was wondering why I picked my always right mug for today.
Oh my goddess, I
Had to
love it
switch it
so
up.
much.
Can't make this shit up, can you? It's beautiful.
I love it.
It's really what I was just like receiving there as you're sharing was this vision of like the two anchors or energies that we can play with in storytelling. And it was really relating to this idea of like, yeah, we want the nice resolution, we want the nice bow on the end of it. We want everything to be neatly wrapped up. You know, like when there's sitcoms that have gone on for years and years, if it suddenly gets cancelled, people get very upset because all the storylines are opened up. So you always see at the end of a sitcom that's planned to finish, start watching all of the storylines being brought to a close and sealed up and all of the things. So there is an innate kind of drive for that completion, that satisfaction at the end of it all. And feeling into that, like this idea that we should have the happy ending in our life. Like I'll get there, right? The ever elusive there, where I get to the end of the story, the challenges have been overcome, and I turn into Cinderella, have a magical, like marry a prince, and everything's perfect, and we waltz off into the sunset to some really beautiful Disney music. Um, there's like that like happy ending, like everything works out, that there's a part of us that like really, really wants that. But the vision that I was receiving there is like, well, the way in which people tell stories, I wonder if it would be more healthy, more aligned, more realistic to see it from a perspective of like the hero's journey, or the masculine linear versions of stories could be more like anecdotal. Like these are intended to bring a meaning in a moment in time. They're not the whole picture. They're one instance, right? We see like it's a snippet, it's a snapshot of a moment in time that has a meaning that can be transmitted, that can be shared through that. I think about this in everything from like, this could be, yeah, like a short story, one of the like Hansel and Gretel, right? Or there is, I see people use this in content creation, in marketing and content creation, all of that. Like you'll have like snippets of stories that are told about a particular point in life, a particular moment, a particular scenario that demonstrates an arc, or a point, or an outcome, or whatever it is, or a journey. It delineates the thing and creates it. So those could be moments in time, but I think we expect that to be our whole lives, right? Where there's a neat resolution and a meaning at the end of it, and a point where we go, oh yes, like that's the bow, that was the purpose of it all. But like, what if the more feminine energied version is the overview, is the big picture, is all of it? It holds it all. And within that, there's many little heroes' journeys that happen for us all, that depict these moments in time, these, we say we've lived many lifetimes in one lifetime, right? It's like that. It's like, what are our stories? What are our anecdotes? What are our ways of transmitting meaning within the greater whole? And then in the feminine, we can be bouncing from one journey into the next journey, into the next moment, into the, it's the holding of it all, the whole life that doesn't end then. It's just this cauldron of all the things that are being experienced.
That's it, though. I mean, we were speaking earlier about ecosystems, and the feminine is the ecosystem. It's that's holding all the different stories that are being told together versus, just the one, you could tell a whole story about just the landscape here, and that's the lead character, and that's the story. But then how does that feed in with the people who own the land here that I'm living on? How does it feed into my own story? How does it feed into the stories of the people who live around here? And then the animals that come in and out as well. So it's infinite, and I think the other piece that comes up too is we've been taught through this archetype of the hero's journey that I have to get home. We want the thing. We want the prize. We want the outcome. We want the destination. But it truly is about the journey. And to be in the hero's journey versus the heroine's journey doesn't have an end. It's about the beingness versus the doing and havingness. And actually,
Mm.
it needs to be both for it to be embodied and balanced. So it's not making one more right over the other. You know, each woman needs to have her own hero's journey as well, like little mini hero's journeys in the context of the great heroine's journey that she undergoes. And it's the same for the masculine too. You know, there's a greater picture, as you're saying, but we have to learn how to hold the tension of the beingness and the not destinationness of it. And for those of us who identify as more feminine in our energy bodies, we're going to live in that space way more regularly. And so learning to actually take on that capacity, that's a plastic nervous system recalibration. How much can you hold to hold all the different stories inside of you that might be yours, but also might not be yours in any given time? And that then becomes our dharma as feminine energy bodied beings, to be able to be the ecosystems for those stories to be remembered.
Mm. It's feeling so, I love the way you described it because it gave me such a like a beautiful visual, like with the
Mm.
ecosystem and all of the heroes, mini heroes' journeys being held in the bigger context of the heroine's journey. It feels so right in my body
Yeah,
to be
baby.
like, that's where the hero's journey belongs, is many different things. Like I could have the hero's journey of I don't have any milk left and I need to go to the shop and get some milk and then come home. Like there's a mini hero's
Totally.
journey. I have a problem. I have no milk. I have to go home. I am transformed in the shop by the presence of a carton of milk. And then I come home
Such an
with the milk.
odyssey.
I
Yes.
mean, it's a big journey. The courage to go on this journey was a lot.
Well, if it's
Um,
raining in Bali, it really might be quite the journey. You have no idea.
this is true. The journeys can be odysseys all by themselves, even just down the road. But I mean, I'm making light of it, but just the projects we embark upon, or the creations we want to bring into the world, or the partnerships we enter into, or the relationships we enter into, the friendships, the cycles and periods of our lives that are happening, the time spent in a location, the withdrawal from society and the spiritual quest or journey, all of these things can be and contain zillions of other little, like a fractal contains zillions and zillions upon little quantum potentials of hero's journey-esque moments and experiences and learnings. I suppose that's kind of what's coming through, is like the hero's journeys are there to give us the insight, to give us the lessons, to give us the things that we've received and that we can then pass on through that storytelling to others by sharing those snippets, to offer up the lessons. Here's what I've received and experienced and learned, and here's what I can hand on to you from that, in the hope that your future heroes' journeys will be simpler or smoother, or they'll add to the richness of what you're bringing forwards, and like contributing to what gets to move through the collective in that way, as we tell those stories, as we bring those through, as we offer those insights and those learnings up. And then the feminine is the context, is how are we holding it all, how are we being all of it and none of it at the same time, and what gets to birth from these stories and birth from that space of receptivity, where it's like receiving all of the things and amplifying it, and in the being of the wider context there, and being able to shift and change it at any moment, bounce into
Mm-hmm.
something new, where we get into that space of like, oh, can I rewrite this story, or can I choose a new one, where it gets to become choosing your own adventure. Do you ever do those books as a kid? the choose
Totally.
your own adventure books, flip to page. Are you going to go down the doorway in the doorway, or are you going to go into the castle? It's like, oh, well, let me flip to page, whatever. Super fun.
I used to always like choose it, but then I would always be like, oh, I don't like that choice. Or like I want to say, well, what happened if I took this other choice instead? And obviously I would always want to know all the different choices. Obviously.
Yeah, of course. We want to know that we chose the correct one.
Exactly. I am a perfectionist in recovery. I can admit that for sure, you know. What's interesting, I'm not meaning to cut you off if you're in the middle of something, but there are some images that have come up as you spoke. One is first of all, it's the circle, right? And there's a reason it always comes back to a circle because there are no ends and no beginnings. And the concept of the Ouroboros in like ancient Greece, the snake eating its tail, that comes up, right? And it's a snake because the snake is regenerative too. It sheds its skin and new skin forms, but it's always in that circle of regeneration and completion and starting over again. And so the hero's journey is in that circle because it starts again. Now a new hero's journey begins. But as you're saying, it's not about that in the context of a single life, which we're thought like, oh, here's the one full circle we take in this lifetime. It can be, that is potentially it. However, it's much richer to see it as each individual circle for each hero's journey you undergo in the context of your whole life. And what ends up happening is all of those little circles, as they build up over a lifetime, they create the flower of life.
Mm.
And that's the feminine. And where is it going to take you next? You actually are not totally sure. Yeah, it might take you here, but then it might take you here, right? Like it can go in all these different directions, but ultimately it's filled with all these circles and it's never ending and it's ever expanding. And it ripples out from your core outward and touches maybe somebody else's flower of life, right? And then it starts to weave and it gets much more interesting in that kind of a way. So I love what you're speaking to. That rings very true for me as well, because it creates both a linear and nonlinear and very just ever circular concept of life that is just much more interesting. It's so much more interesting. Whew.
Oh my God, did we just describe how we create shared reality?
Oh my gosh, did we? Oh my God, tell me more,
What?
Jess.
Oh my God. Well, the flower of life, these sacred geometries are like they're the building blocks of reality, right? And as we're overlapping and coming into contact with everybody else's stories, and as you were saying, like in your environment, in your ecosystem, it's like, how does my presence here impact the stories of the people around me, and how does somebody else's stories impact me and their everything else? It's like we have this shared reality. There are certainly things that are clear, real, the real things, real real stuff. um where and we have a lot of talk in the spiritual community about I create my reality and my truth is what is true, and it's like, yeah, I mean, there's a yes and, right? We need to learn how to hold multiple layers of truth. There is also a shared reality that we are contributing to, that we are interwoven with the rest of humanity and everything else on this planet that is alive and living and growing, and nature and all of the elements and all of the things. Like, we are sharing a reality. Our individual reality is certainly not the only thing. Like, that's where we start to go look at, you might need to be sectioned if you believe only in your individual reality that is being conjured up from within. That's where we start to worry about delusion, narcissism, all of this good stuff. But in creating the reality, like, these overlaps, the building blocks of the sacred geometries, the flower of life is like, this is what creates life, the seed of life, right? The Vesica Pisces, the birthing, and then it opens and overlaps and creates, and it's the flower of life. Well, if we're overlapping and it's just infinite, like, this is the process of creation, right? And how are we co-creating? Well, with our circles, with our stories, with our experiences, with our little heroes' journeys within the wider context of where this is all overlapping, and we're creating this shared reality. So there's a consideration in this, in our stories, right? It's like, how much do we want to be in our delusion, in our fabricated story of our life? Because it's not just impacting ourselves. It's like, why would we let go of the negative stories? Why would we let go of the stories that we've experienced and created, the way we paint stories, right? The way we tell them. So, for example, like a traumatic, difficult experience we've had. Like one of my favorites was, I used to love villainizing my ex-boyfriends. Because
What?
that would be a
Oh my gosh.
right. Like, who
Nobody
would have
does.
thought? So weird. Who does
I've
that?
never done that ever.
To,
Wow, tell
I
me
mean,
more.
we're very intelligent creatures, right? We don't want to feel the vulnerability in the heart. So what is the guard against the pain of vulnerability? Well, and grief and hurt, well, it's judgment, right? So we judge and we go, well, that's now the villain in my story, in order to sever and to not have to feel the pain. So we paint the stories, and until we can repaint those stories and tell the stories in a different way, then we'll share them with light, then we'll share them with meaning, then we'll share them with completion within them, with a lot of the stories we were told as kids often held like moral messages. Victorian Britain, gotta love it. It's, teach us right from wrong and all of this good stuff,
Well, but
those kind of stories.
it goes earlier than that. I mean, it really does go earlier than that as well. I mean, if you look at
Yeah.
fairy tales, the Brothers Grimm and everything, there are lessons in that too. So that's I mean, that's just par for the course in all of the storytelling. However, once it starts getting into like behaviors and how you're supposed to act in a, falsely generated like societal narrative, that's where it becomes the Victorians, maybe a little bit more. But probably the Romans. I mean, I
It's
just have to
probably the
say it.
Romans.
It was probably the Romans. I
It's the
forgot to talk
Romans and
about
all
that
their
the last.
painting their stories on their vases and all that sort of stuff. It was
Yeah,
probably Roman pottery that did it. Rude, really.
I just want to create chaos and start telling a news story. So that's why I brought up the Romans, but no, but probably the Victorians. Yeah. Anyways, continue.
Just as an example, though. But yeah, it's like when we've come to completion with a story, then we can share it from the place of, this is what I learned, this is what I brought, right? And we can paint the stories differently. The reason we should do that is because our stories overlap and create a collective reality that we're living in. And so if we keep telling the wounded story, if we keep telling the pain story to other people, if we keep telling the incomplete, villainized, painted over perspective of our lives or our experiences, that's what we're rippling out into the collective. If we're telling, be careful, don't go near this thing or that thing, because you'll get hurt, life will be horrible, it'll all come to an end. That sort of
Mhm.
fear driven kind of story. Like, what are we putting into the flower of the life, flower of the life, flower of life of the collective, and the co-creation of this reality? Like, so much of that is through the way we tell the stories of our lives, of our experiences. We have to choose the new thing. So it's like I used to, when I was getting sober in recovery, there was a lot of, and doing shadow work, right? Doing shadow work, doing the hard things, looking at painful truths, facing my own like characteristics and traits about myself that I didn't like, things that I needed to change, things that I was ashamed of that I'd done in the past, having to clean all of this kind of stuff up, right? There was a deep knowing within me that, like, there were days I would never do that for myself because I didn't believe myself to be worthy of that kind of level of work. There were days where I was like, I would never choose to do this level of stuff for my own benefit. But something deep within me knew, you've got to show up to the plate. You've got to change the story. You've got to change this. not for you, but for everybody else, for the people that you'll serve, for the people in your life that you love. It's not about you. Sometimes when the strength is not there to do it for yourself, can you do it for everybody else? Can you do it for the people whose lives you are intricately interwoven into, so that this collective flower of life can be beautiful, and beautiful stories can be brought forwards, beautiful micro moments can be shared, and we can co-create something that is really, really, really stunning. So it's like when we think our lives don't matter, when we think what we're doing individually doesn't matter, it does. It threads through everything and meets with others and transforms those stories. And that's what we're doing in growth work, in development.
I mean, absolutely. I think that's so beautifully said. And it's comes back to this life artistry and what story are you telling in your individual life? Because it's always both. It's always you are the hero and heroine of your own life story. So what story and whose story are you living? Are you really your own lead character? Are you? Or are you a side character in your own life? And this is something that drives me bonkers because people are like, wow, you're like the main character. I'm like, you better believe I'm the main character in my own life. Who else is going to be the main character? You know, and I wasn't born a Leo sun woman for nothing. Or I have Leo sun, Leo Mercury, and a hell of a lot of Aries, which is all about the individual. So I have a huge ego that I have to regularly keep in check. And you know what, though? It's because this is part of my journey to be able to help people remember you're the lead character of your own story too, babe. Because if you are not, you're living somebody else's life. You are not living your authentic truth. Your impact on the flower of life becomes weakened. It's literally weakening the collective flower. This is going to be sound very harsh, but it is what it is. It's like a rot in the flower. There's something wrong with the flower. Like the aphids are coming and they're eating the flowers. There's something in the soil, whatever it is, but you're weakening the collective ecosystem. It cannot blossom because of whatever you are doing, because you aren't living your life as the main character. There are so many people that live with the false narrative, especially women, but men too, who are especially have families. We are taught to live for other people. You must take care of others before you take care of yourself. There's a part of that that's not untrue. There's a part of it like support those who cannot help themselves in the community. However, if you do not exist, you're not helping anyone. You know, like, so there's a part of it, you must take care of your own existence. You must put yourself first in order to take care of everybody else, right? What do they say on the plane? The minute that you get on and it's like there's an emergency, you put your face mask on first, and then you put on the person's next to you. That's how it works. So you must claim your life as your own. You must figure out what your hero's journey is so that you can actually contribute in a meaningful way to the collective. Yes, for the collective, but actually for you. Do it for you first. Because to be honest, if you're not happy in the life that you are living, nobody around you is very happy either, because that's just how it works. That's just how it works. And when you change the narrative of your life, and I'm sure you have a very similar experience, because generally speaking, when somebody takes their life narrative and they reframe it into being a new narrative, the people around them don't generally like that, don't necessarily want the change. And I experienced that. I radically upheaved my life. The image that I usually use when I'm describing my spiritual awakening journey is that I took a hand grenade to my own life. Like everything was quote unquote perfect. And I was like, yeah, it's not feeling right. I'm deeply depressed and it's not okay. And I basically was like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And I just blew it up, and it When you and I get into our own origin stories, I can get into more of that. But the reality is everything, and I mean everything, exploded down to my body, down to my relationships, down to my home, down to my job. Like everything exploded. And then my entire like unit, my family, my ecosystem was left bewildered at what had happened. They didn't know how to
Mm.
support me. Some people stepped up and were just like, I love you. You are always worthy of being loved. I've got you no matter what. Some people said that, but couldn't actually hold that. Some people fell away entirely. Some people left and came back, like, and it does ripple out, you know, because then now what happens is whatever story you tell holds frequency because we ourselves are embodied frequency, you know, and we're moving into a space collectively where we're moving into more frequency medicine, embodying frequency and sharing frequency and becoming much more aware of what frequency we're embodying and how that affects the world around us and what we're calling in, all of this, right? But like we as frequency bodied beings, you know, the things that are not in alignment with our frequency, they start to fall away. And if you are choosing to stay in a certain frequency, you will only ever be in that frequency. So, what stories are you telling? Are you living in victimhood? Are you continuing to live in the wound? Are you obsessed with that? This is why talk therapy only works for so long. It's not a bad thing. It's brilliant to speak to it, get it out. But at a certain point, it just keeps you in the narrative of the talking. You don't ever actually, it doesn't really teach you to embody it. You have to
Mm.
process it before to move it through the body to get it out so that when you start then telling the story that used to hold charge for you, your body is at peace and your nervous system doesn't care anymore. Like I found out recently, for instance, that like my ex-husband just got remarried. And in the past, had I not moved through all of that energy around all the feelings around my ex-husband and the journey, the 7-year journey, almost 8-year journey we took together, had I not processed that, there would have been so much pain to feel. And I found it out and I'm like, oh, there was a little ping, like a little like needle prick, very tiny. And it was just like, ooh. But then after that, I was like, okay, like there's no charge anymore. And even if I tell my own story, there's no charge anymore around things that used to feel so energetically dense because I've moved through that. Because I
Mm.
don't want to stay in that energy body anymore. I want to tell a new story. And most beings, I believe, most humans, I believe, want to tell a different story. Their current story is not working for them. They just don't know another story exists yet. The new story sounds scary because it's unknown. That's okay. That's okay. But you have to be willing to tell a different story for the different story to actually come through. That's how you claim your own life, and that's how you actually become the hero and heroine. And that's how you eventually contribute to a beautifully blossoming flower of life in our collective ecosystem.
Mm. So beautiful.
Sometimes I feel like I'm just like talking for way too long. So thank you so much for just always indulging me.
No, it's so rich. I mean, I have the same thing. I'm like, I feel like I'm talking way too much here. But no, it's like we're following a thread of energy, and once it starts moving, we have to move with it. It
It's
is
just
what
going.
wants to come through and what wants to be shared and what wants to be said, you know? Like we put out a
Mm,
pretty powerful prayer for that every time. So
we really do.
it's
Well,
what
and
is meant to come in. That was
when we
beautiful.
first started talking, I felt the really strong energy to get my crystal. I have my dragon, my pyrite dragon head with me, and I've been holding it the whole
Mm.
time that we've been talking. And I almost never do that. Like sometimes I'll have the crystals out if I'm talking and it's an important thing, and I call the ones that from the altar want to be up, but I don't usually hold them the whole time. So for whatever reason, really strong dragon energy, and it's pyrite, which is all about gold and abundance and fortune and the treasure, right? Like that's what dragons do. So
Mm.
for what I'm not sure what that's about exactly. I just choose to trust it, but it's really interesting. It's like really powerful golden
Mm.
thread of dragon energy with us on this call right now.
It's so beautiful. So
Yeah.
beautiful. The word that was dropping in there, and I think actually what you've just shared like brings today to such a completion for
Mm.
me, like feeling all of that. But I think even for my own psyche, and I'm going to do this for everybody else as well, is almost just to pull and to recap the little pieces that really stood out to me there. And as you were speaking to the dragon, it was like the treasure that is in this. And then that's what was coming through is like, we don't have to keep holding on to the idea that there's a linear journey to our lives, that there's a treasure at the end of it, that there is the prize, right? We don't have to keep holding on to seeing our whole life as one hero's journey. We can have many, many, many miniature heroes' journeys. They are all contained in this beautiful context of the feminine, of the womb, of the receptivity, of the void, of the space in which things are received and amplified and birthed, and we can move around it and we can change it at any time. We can switch it up at any time. We can tell a new story. When we do, we get to choose to infuse it with meaning, with insight, with the wisdom. As we've processed the story through our body, we come to wisdom, lived experience, having it encoded in our embodiment, that we can then offer those stories, that wisdom into the world, keep telling our stories, however we do it, right? Music, art, poetry, through our businesses, whatever it is we're doing, in friendship groups, to our partners, to our children in the future. And know that that is weaving a web of new wisdom into the collective flower of life that is creating a new experience of this world together. We're creating this new reality, this new ever evolving, not new, like, oh, it's not this anymore. Now it's this. It's just the ever evolving. We get to choose to infuse life and the reality we live in with more and more and more shared collective wisdom. So if there's anything I am taking from this, it is to tell stories with awareness and discernment, clarity, and when they are in completion, when there is an insight, when there is a level of wisdom to be offered, to elevate those stories to a very beautiful place of sacredness and sanctity, and to bring those into the world, to let it be our art, to let it be our offering into the world, so that we can keep carrying these waves forwards and co-creating something truly beautiful, truly magical. It can
Mm.
create a collective shared experience of something very, very wonderful and beautiful for us all.
Mm. Beautifully said. I mean, this is how we actually change the world. There's a lot happening that doesn't feel good to, I would say, the vast majority of humans on the planet, regardless of how they're affected. And there's a lot of people who desire to do something about it. And everybody has a different way that they get to be of service to collective humanity to make a difference. But one of the best and most effective ways to do that is to get really clear on what story you are telling. And I can say with personal embodied knowledge that the lives of not only myself, but those around me are better now because of the story that I chose to tell. And I'm not taking that in an egoic way. Like, I did it. I made all the difference. I mean, I can, and there might be moments I do things like that because let's just be honest, I have a huge ego, as I've already stated. But the reality is I can see the direct correlation and effect that how I've shown up has shifted things for those around me who I love. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for that. Because it wasn't easy, that's for sure. But all of those who have stuck with me, one way or the other, been through the trenches, chosen to transform in their own way, in their own stories, because my story shifted, I love them supremely. I love them supremely. And it was only ever my own authentic truth that I had to commit to support myself with, that supported their lives. And I know that the lives that they touch are also now being affected in different ways because of that change. This is the concept of paying it forward. But this is really how we take control of changing the world. What story are you telling? And are you your own hero and heroine? And I'm telling you, I'm telling you, we need heroes and heroines now in this world more than ever. All of the language that's been coming through is like, are you in your villain era? And all it is claiming yourself. Disney is about to make a whole theme park around villains. Why is there so much obsession with villainry? We need heroes and heroines more than ever now.
Mm.
And it is possible to be a hero. It's possible to be a villain too. It's possible that those things are the exact same thing. How can you hold your light and your dark in such a way that you rise above the chaos and actually create a better world, though, through the story you're living and telling?
Mm. Beautiful.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had so much, but I always have fun on these calls, but talking about storytelling in the way we did today felt extra juicy. So thank you.
So
Thank you.
beautiful.
Thank you, my
So
love.
juicy. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's listening. Have a beautiful
Yeah.
day.
Many blessings.
Go tell a new story.
Go tell a new story. Yeah.
And see you soon.
Mwah. Ciao.